Red Dead Redemption 2 is a game that's been talked about, praised, analysed and debated for years. Released back in 2018, it's often held up as one of the greatest games ever made. But in 2026, with gaming having moved on technically and mechanically, the real question is, does it still hold up? I went into Red Dead Redemption 2 completely fresh in 2026, knowing the reputation, but not the story, not the characters, and not how it would actually feel to play. So this isn't a retrospective from someone who's played it 5 times. This is a perspective of someone experiencing it for the first time, and so far, only time.
Lenny, keep that door covered. Dante must be up there. Let's go. Where are you hiding?
Let's start with the story, because honestly, this is where Red Dead Redemption 2 still shines the brightest. At its core, Red Dead Redemption 2 is a story about the end of an era, not just the Wild West, but the end of freedom, loyalty, and the illusion that you can outrun change. The pacing early on is slow, sometimes painfully so, but that slowness feels intentional. You're not thrown into explosive set pieces every 5 minutes. Instead, you live with the gang, you ride with them, you work, hunt, talk, argue, and slowly start to understand who these people are. By the time the cracks really begin to show, you feel it emotionally. Not because the game tells you to, but because you've spent dozens of hours watching it happen. Arthur Morgan's arc is genuinely one of the most well-written character journeys I've experienced in gaming. Watching him question his loyalty, his morality, and eventually himself feels earned, human, and painfully grounded. In 2026, with so many games still struggling to tell subtle, character-driven stories, Red Dead Redemption 2's narrative still feels exceptional. Arthur Morgan deserves his own section. He's not flashy, he's not constantly delivering heroic speeches, he's tired, conflicted, and slowly realising that his life that he's lived might not mean what he thought it did. What impressed me the most is how much of Arthur's development happens between missions. Through optional conversations, through journal entries, through quiet moments on horseback. You don't just watch Arthur change, you feel it. By the final chapters, the emotional payoff hits hard, especially knowing this was my first experience with the character. There was no I know what's coming safety net. The weight of his journey lands fully. Even in 2026, Arthur Morgan stands comfortably alongside the best protagonists gaming has ever produced. The wider cast is another huge strength. Dutch, Hosea, Sadie, John, Micah. They're not just mission dispensers, they're flawed, contradictory, and often frustrating in very human ways. Dutch's descent is particularly well handled. You don't see a villain flip a switch. You see a man slowly unravel, clinging to the ideas that no longer fit the world he's in. Sadie's growth from victim to survivor to force of nature feels earned, not rushed. John's arc, especially knowing where he ends up later, adds a bittersweet layer to the entire experience. Because this was my first playthrough, I didn't know who would live, who would die, or who would betray whom, and that uncertainty made every interaction feel heavier. This is where my feelings get complicated. On one hand, the ending payoff is strong. Emotionally, narratively, it ties things together in a satisfying way, especially for John. But getting there, it drags. The epilogue feels overly long, padded with tasks that don't always justify their screen time. After the emotional peak of Arthur's story, the pacing slows dramatically, and not always in a way that feels intentional or meaningful. I don't understand why it exists in the length that it does, but I do understand what Rockstar was trying to do. For me, it slightly killed the momentum. The emotional high point had already passed, and the game took too long to reach its final payoff. I honestly think the epilogue could have been cut down significantly without losing its impact, and in doing so, it would have left a much stronger final impression. Gameplay is where Red Dead Redemption 2 is starting to show its age the most. The controls are deliberate, slow, and sometimes frustrating. Everything has weight, from looting bodies to mounting your horse, and while that adds immersion, it also creates friction. In 2026, after years of smoother, more responsive open world games, Red Dead Redemption 2 can feel clunky. There were moments where I was fighting the controls rather than engaging with the world. That said, once the systems click, they do serve the game's tone. This isn't meant to be fast or fluid, it's meant to feel grounded and methodical. Still, there's no denying that some of the design choices feel dated now, especially during combat and menu navigation. This was my first and only playthrough, and honestly, I'm torn on replayability. Narratively, there's absolutely value in replaying it. Knowing where the characters end up would add layers to early conversations and choices. But the sheer length, slow pacing and heavy commitment make it hard to jump back into casually. This feels like a game you replay years later, not months. It's an experience, not a comfort game. Visually, Red Dead Redemption 2 is still stunning in 2026. The landscapes, lighting, animations and attention to detail are incredible, especially for a game that released in 2018. At times, it still outclasses modern releases in environmental storytelling. However, it is desperately crying out for a 4K 60 FPS update. The lack of a smooth performance upgrade holds it back more than anything else. The world deserves to be experienced at higher fidelity and frame rates, especially on modern hardware. A proper next-gen update wouldn't just be a nice bonus, it would elevate the entire experience and make revisiting the game far more appealing. So, where does Red Dead Redemption 2 land for me in 2026? Taking everything into account, the story, the characters, the world, and also its flaws, I'd give Red Dead Redemption 2 a strong 9 out of 10. The storytelling and character work are still absolutely top tier, and Arthur Morgan alone carries this game into an all-time great territory. That said, it does lose points for me due to the clunky and dated controls, the lack of proper 4K 60 FPS update, and an epilogue that, while meaningful, feels longer and more bloated than it needs to be. Even with those issues, this is still one of the most emotionally impactful games I've ever played, and experiencing it for the first time in 2026 only reinforced why it's held in such high regard. I'm planning to do more deep dive reviews of classic games through a modern lens, especially ones I missed when they first released. No nostalgia bias, no rushed opinions, just honest first time experiences in today's gaming landscape. So if that sounds like your kind of content, consider subscribing and let me know in the comments what game you think I should tackle next.